It's great to see everybody here. Bear with me. If I get to stuttering or saying, too much, raise your hand and I'll start laughing or something. Nannie Tiffany Alderson, as Judy says, was my great-grandmother. She was born in 1860 in Monroe County, West Virginia. She died at Wolf, Wyoming in 1947. She was born to Captain Hugh and Susan Tiffany in Virginia. Her father was a young lawyer and captain of the Confederate Army. When he left to go to war, the ladies of the Monroe County made a flag for him and sent it with him. And that is still in the family today. I really wanted to bring it, but it didn't work out. It has bullet holes in it. It's really cool. I remember it as a kid. I was fascinated with it. Her mother was, her father was killed in the first battle of Manassas. They say that he may have been the first Southern officer to fall in the Civil War. Her mother was kind of a socialite, not really into parenting, was more interested in who was there and who was around. She remarried a Colonel Rowland when Nannie was, I refer to her as Nannie Domo, which was a nickname given to her by her first grandson. So if I talk about Nannie or Domo, it's the same person. But Nannie was about a little under 4 when her mother got remarried. And she would stay with her mother in the summer, but she was raised by her grandmother in Union, Virginia. She was kind of a lonely child. Her grandmother was deaf. She did spend some summers, and there was 2 half-siblings. She got along with the daughter very well, but didn't have much good to say about the son. She did attend school, a little bit of seminary school, but in those days, women really didn't attend much school. So when she was 16, her brother's sister, Elizabeth Tiffany, was in Atchison, Kansas. So Nannie went to stay with her, and Nannie loved Atchison. It was a little more relaxed atmosphere, not as social status, and you could take your crocheting to visit, which was not allowed in Virginia. She was raised with servants, always had somebody to wash and cook for her. She was a privileged child. She was there the first time in 1876 in Atchison for 9 months, and at that visit there was a party at the Alderson house. They had a lot of sons there, and when they were at this party, her future husband, Walt, came in, and he had not been home for 9 years, and he was kind of a rugged cowboy, and everybody was a little horrified with Walt. But that was the first time they met. She went back to West Virginia, and then when she was 17, she went back out to Atchison, and that time she stayed for 4 years. During that time, she spent a lot of time at the Alderson house because Walt's father, Lou Alderson, was dying of cancer. So she was kind of the night nurse. And at that time, Walt was back in Atchison with some horses, and he would come by the house, and he and Nannie spent a lot of time visiting, and they both kind of had lonely childhoods, and then, so that's how they got to know each other. Walt's father was Lewis Alderson. He was born in Virginia in 1811. They lived in Alderson, West Virginia, which a woman's prison is there now, federal prison. That's where Stewart, Martha Stewart was. But he was an abolitionist, and so he left and went to Atchison, Kansas before the Civil War. And he was a Baptist minister and built one of the first Baptist churches in Kansas. Both parents were very involved in their church. They had 7 kids, and the older kids kind of raised the younger ones. So Walt was kind of bullied, and he really didn't like it in Atchison. He ran away when he was 13 with 2 other boys from Atchison to go to Texas. And the other fathers went after their sons and brought them back. But his father said, nope, if he wants to go, let him go. And his time in Texas, I think he was a dishwasher, and he drove a stage. I think he was a little wild, and that's where he got into the horses and the cattle. He was born in 1856 in West Virginia. He, as I said, ran away, and then he came back to Atchison when Nannie was there with his partner for a long time, Mr. Zook, and they had horses in Atchison, racehorses in Atchison. When they were there at Atchison, Walt asked Nannie to go to Montana with him. And I really don't think he thought she would, but she said yes. And she was up for the adventure. So Walt left for Texas and Montana to find a place and get cattle. And Domo went back to Virginia to prepare for her wedding. They were married in April in 1883 at her mother's house in Union, West Virginia, in the morning. And then that evening they rode a buggy over to Alderson, West Virginia to visit the Aldersons. And that night they boarded a train for Montana. Her quote was, knowing how to make yeast rolls and a vague understanding that a petticoat should be simple were my whole equipment for conquering the West. Their first ranch, they arrived in April 20th, 1883, and of course Walt and his partner Zook were there in 82. It was where the Rosebud and Lame Deer Creek join. It's current day Lame Deer. Her first home was an old abandoned logger's cabin. It had 2 rooms, a dirt floor, and their other house was being built. But she was a little shocked when she saw her first home. It was a 100-mile buggy ride to the closest town. And they were, like I said, they were building her new house. That first year was actually, she really enjoyed Montana. She got to ride on the roundup some. There was always things going on in the corral. The men helped her cook. They brought in wood. They taught her to cook. They helped her with the wash. And there was a lady that lived down the road. It doesn't mention her name. And Walt hired her to do Domo's washing. But she overcharged her, and she was very condescending and critical of Domo, and would make, well, why do you do that? But she wouldn't tell her, she wouldn't give her hints or tell her how to do something. So she didn't, Nannie was not fond of her. And when one of my favorite quotes of Domo's was, there are 2 things you never talk about, your blue blood or religion. If you have a speck of either, it's bound to show up in some other way. In August, they moved to their new house. It was kind of a luxury house, one of the best in western Montana. It had double wood floors that were sanded, so for warmth. It had 4 rooms, a bunk for the boys, a kitchen and living area for cooking and living, and then they had a bedroom. While she was there, she was pregnant with her first child, so she went to Miles City about 3 weeks before to have her first child, which was born March 18th of 1889. It was a girl, Mabel, and just within an hour after she was born, Walt got a telegram that the house, their brand new house, was burned to the ground. And as what had happened was there was a black wolf, an Indian, who would come and get food from him and water or whatever they were good to him. And he was leaving and sitting on a pile of posts smoking his pipe. And one of the cowboys got to saying, hey, I bet you I can put a hole in Black Wolf's hat. and so one of them did. And of course, Black Wolf was furious and rallied the Indians, and that night they burned his house, their house. And it was a total loss. The Civil War flag was in the bottom of the trunk that she had in Miles City, so it survived, but that was about the only thing. Early in the summer of '84, because the house was burned, and they just had the corrals, they decided to move to Tongue River. So it was north of Bernie. It was 30 miles, the book says east, but it was actually more south from Lame Deer. And because they were moving cattle and setting up new headquarters and building a new house, Nannie was in Miles City for quite a while. But there was a lot of extra work. So they hired extra help, and they hired an old codger named Pack Saddle Jack, which he's in a lot of history books, and he's kind of an unreal guy. And where they had a watering hole, the Iron Shirt had a teepee. And when the cattle would come into water, he would sick his dog on them and stampede the cattle. Well, Pack Saddle Jack had enough of it and shot Little Wolf. And that was Iron Shirt, sorry. And so they had another big scare, and the house they were building was about 6 or 7 logs up, so it made a great fort. So Walt rode to the Brewsters and got the ranchers from Tongue River, and they all came and set up a fort, and the Indians surrounded them for a day or two, but nothing ever came of it. There was no squabble, but it was a pretty scary deal. Walt made Pack Saddle Jack go back to, I believe it was Lame Deer, and he was acquitted. And he stayed out of the country for about a year, but then he came back. And Walt set Iron Shirt's arm, and Iron Shirt he was at the house a lot, followed Walt around, and I guess he thought Walt was a pretty good guy. So this was their second ranch, and in August of '84, Domo came from Miles City because the house was done. And it was a 2-story house, but it was not near the house the first one was. It was a lot of rough lumber. The top story was just a loft, and they put bedrolls up there, and later did put some beds up there for guests and cowboys. But it had a bunk room and a kitchen, which was also their living area and their bedroom. During the time at Tongue River, she had a baby, and she didn't like to leave her baby. So she spent a lot of time at the house, and it was starting to realize that it was not as romantic in the West. And she felt like she felt sorry for herself. She said, feeling sorry for yourself is the lowest state of which a woman's mind can go. In 1885 was a really hard year. There was a hard winter of '86 and '87. Domo went to Virginia. She was expecting another child, and so she went to visit family and to go to Virginia. She had a second daughter, Faye, that was born August of 1885, while Walt was still at the ranch. Walt came in Thanksgiving to be with her when the work slowed down. But that winter was very hard, and he was getting telegrams, and he was antsy to get back. So just as soon as they could, in early March, late February, they took off to Miles City and then to the ranch. It was usually a 3-day trip, and that time it took 5 days. And Nannie had 2 babies in the back of a wagon. One day they only made it 10 miles, but she was really glad to get out of that wagon. In '86, because of actually during the hard winter, they did not lose as many cattle because they weaned, which a lot of people did not do, and they also had some hay and were able to feed some when they could. So they did have a lot of losses, but not a total loss, and not the losses that some ranchers did. But because of the cattle prices in the hard winter, Zook and Alderson decided to split partners. And in the split, Zook got the house and the land, and Walt got the cattle, which means they had to move again. This time they moved to Muddy Creek, where the Muddy Creek meets the Rosebud. And it's actually pretty close to Highway 12 now, east of west of Lame Deer, about 10 miles. It was a 2-room shack, and they had no money to furnish it. It had very little furniture. She made furniture out of cans and boards, and they had a chuck wagon for their kitchen and their table. And she said that's when pioneering began in earnest. That was also where Walt he was still in the cattle business, but he started the horse business too. She did have friends there within 10 miles. She was very good friends with the Rowlands, which are in some of Forrest's books, and the Youngs. The Youngs had a little trading store at current day Lame Deer, and they were good friends with them. During that time, Little Wolf was a Cheyenne chief that lived close, and he had 2 wives, and they hired one of the wives to help Nannie with washing. And so once a week she came and they washed, and Little Wolf would take the kids and spend hours in the hills. And Nannie said, I never worried about him because he knew about snakes and was very careful and just took such good care. And of course the girls loved it. And I know the 2 oldest girls, and maybe all 4 of them, could speak Cheyenne fluently because the Cheyennes were around so much and had a lot of times would have an Indian woman taking care of them. During that time, there were some other Indian scares. In 1889, there was an Indian uprising. There was a medicine man that was kind of stirring up some trouble, and so the Youngs came and got Domo and the girls, and they went to their place and stayed for about 24 hours. And they did have a skirmish with the cavalry, and the medicine man was shot, and that just kind of ended it, so it only lasted a few days. In 1890, Robert Ferguson, their neighbor, which is also an uncle of mine, was killed. He was out looking for cattle and came up with some Indians that were butchering, and he was killed. So that scared a lot of the people in the community, and Walt was one of the men that found the body. It took about a week before they found him buried in a shallow grave on a side of a hillside in a very remote area. So Nannie worried a lot because she was worried that they would reciprocate with Walt, and the Indians were around, and there'd been some uprisings. Also, there was some horses and studs at the ranch, and she was afraid that something was going to happen. He was going to get kicked or something. In 1890, their 3rd daughter, Patty, was born at the ranch. And in 1893, their 4th child, Walt, who was my grandfather, was born at the ranch. It was kind of hard times. They couldn't afford help. Walt was gone a lot because they didn't have help. But she did have some friends, but she had a lot of work and 4 kids, and I don't think Walt left her. I think he usually had a hired man or somebody, usually close to her. In 1883, they decided to move to Miles City. Their oldest daughter, Mabel, was 10. She had never had any schooling other than the Montgomery Ward catalog. And the low cattle prices, they just decided to move to Miles City. So in the spring of 83, or sometime in 83, they moved to a 2-story frame house. It was the only frame house that Nannie ever lived in. The kids were so excited. It had a furnace, it had stairs, and it had a bathroom. The first year was very, very hard for them. Work was hard to come by. Prices were low. They really struggled, but the kids loved it. In 1984, Zook, who was Walt's former partner, became the county assessor. So he hired Walt to be his deputy assessor. So things were really looking up. They had money. Things were good. In the morning of 1895, Walt was training a team so he could have a buggy to go to his job as the assistant assessor. And he had a stud boarded in his barn, and then he had a few horses himself. And that was the last time Nannie saw him conscious. He went to the barn and something happened. He got kicked in the head. And he lived for 6 days, and on March 18th, 1895, he died. So Domo was left with 4 small children. Well, the girls were a little bit older. And she stayed in Miles City for 7 years after that. She did anything she could. She sold eggs, she sold milk, she had a cow and some chickens. She catered a little bit, just whatever she could do, and they got by, but it was never great. And I remember stories that my grandfather was absolutely humiliated because he had to take his little red wagon and deliver milk and eggs through town. So in 1902, someone offered her to run the Bernie store. So her and her 4 children went to the Bernie store, and they lived in the back of it. So she became a merchant, a postmaster, and a mother. It was a very social time. Mail came once a week, and it was always dance night. And Domo had bought a piano, an old piano that was 2 octaves short. So they played that, and they would also haul it to all the parties at the time of her. She said that piano had more fun than any grand piano anywhere. She said she wasn't a very good business lady, though, and should have made more money, but she didn't. In 1906, Walt had been on the cattle drives, her youngest son. He went when he was 11 years old, and of course they started in March and went through November. So for 6 months he would be on the cattle drives, and he loved it. And so in 1906, Domo bought a ranch on Young's Creek, which is around Decker, is that right? And Mabel was married, Faye was gone, and so it was Patty and my granddad Walt and Domo that ran the ranch. They started out with 30 or 40 head of cattle and built it up to 250. In 1917 was a bad year for the cattle market, and Patty had married and was at Eaton's Ranch. My grandfather, they called him Walt. No, my grandfather, Bud, sorry, who was also Walt, Bud was married to Nova Moody. So when they lost everything, she was in her 60s, and she went to Eaton's to live. They built a cabin for her about 3 miles down from the main house. Had no running water. She didn't want running water. She got water out of Wolf Creek, had an outhouse out back, and she lived there. The guys would come down and chop ice, and it wasn't until in her 70s that she would spend the winters up at the main house at Eaton's. As far as her children, Mabel was the oldest. She was born in 1884 and died in 1949. Her first husband was Gilbert Culver, and they had a place on Young's Creek because that's why Domo got a ranch, because it was close to Mabel and her first husband. She had a son, Dexter, and when he was 10, he got kicked by a horse and was killed. Her second, she divorced him, married a Meeker in 1918, and divorced him and married a Walker. So I never heard much about Mabel. That's why I don't. Maybe that's why. Because divorce wasn't the big thing back then. And the last one, they lived in Washington, but I believe she ended up in Sheridan after she divorced him. I know she's buried in Sheridan. Faye, the second child, was born in 1886 in Virginia. She died in 1977. She went to Berkeley to school. She never married. She taught middle school for years at Central. She was also the superintendent of both Rosebud and Bighorn County school districts. And she lived in Domo's cabin, and that's what I called it Annie Faye's cabin, and I would stay with her in that 3-room cabin. I loved it, but she is buried in Miles City next to her father. Patty Eaton was born in 1891 on the ranch at Muddy Creek. She died in 1982. She married Bill Eaton in 1914 and lived at Eaton's Ranch for the rest of her life. She had 2 children, William Alden Jr., who we called Billy, born in 1917, and he died in 1949, just before Domo did. Nancy Eaton was the daughter, and she stayed at the ranch. She was born in 1921 and died in 2009, and she remained at Eaton's all her life. She had 4 children. Walt, my grandfather, was born at Muddy Creek in 1893 and died in 1950, so I never knew Walt. He didn't have much school. He didn't like school. He'd rather be on a horse. He was at Young's Creek from 1907 to 1917. He married Nova Moody in 1915, so they lived at Young's Creek, and then they moved to Cache Creek, which is Kirby, Montana, right on the Cheyenne Reservation, or borders it. They had 1 son, my father, William Cadell, that was born in July of 1916. Walt is buried in Sheridan. A lot of people wonder how my Alderson Domo is related to the Bones brothers of Bernie, Montana, which were Aldersons. Walt's little brother, Lou Alderson, came to Montana in the 1800s. He worked for the Browns. He managed their place for a while. And then he homesteaded in 1899. And I honestly don't know if that was on Hanging Woman or Tongue River. He married Emma Roberts. Emma Roberts' sister was married Cox, I'll think of his name. Anyway, he married Cox.
Zachary Taylor.
Yeah, Zachary Cox, thank you, Zachary Taylor Cox. And Emma died when she was quite young. They had 3 boys, which were Floyd Alderson, Alan Alderson, Irv Alderson. Most people know them as Bones, which was Floyd, Big Bones, which was Alan, and Little Bones, which was Irv. Floyd never married, and he went to Hollywood and was a actor under the name Hal Tafafiro, which is after a hired man that shot the first Indian. And Alan was Big Bones. He married Dorothy, and later Mary Alderson. They had 3 girls, and Irv was Little Bones, and they had 2 boys, which was Irv and Alan. Bones' brother Dude's Ranch was actually a Cox and Alderson ranch on Hanging Woman, and Aldersons live there now. Irv is gone, but his girls live there. Jeannie lives there, and Mary lives there. Natalie is in Montana, Bozeman, Montana, I believe. Emma died quite young. I don't know how old those Bones brothers were when she died, but they were raised by, some people call her Aunt Mamie, I call her Cousin Peachy, but she was raised by Peachy Cox. And that's where this picture was taken, was at the Cox Ranch on Hanging Woman, which is now at the Bones Brothers. There's a little boy in a white collar in the front porch, and that is my grandfather. Faye and Patty are on the porch, and Zachary Cox is on the porch. That is an L.A. Huffman picture. It's in, I don't know if it's before barbed wire or after barbed wire, but that picture is in there. So, does anybody have any questions?
So, is that cabin still?
They tore it down about 5 years ago.
They did.
Oh.
Yes.
And on what ranch is it?
Bones Brothers Aldersons, which is Irv Alderson's
the
So,
circle?
Big Bones, Little Bones' place. And Jeannie Alderson is there now, her and her husband ranch there.
And what's the brand?
What was the brand?
The brand, yeah, do you,
ZT. I know the Alderson brand, but I don't know.
CC.
okay, thank you.
The brand that Zook and Alderson had was the sugar bowl and spoon, so it's round and it has a end sticking up. And then they also had a brand that was TIF with a bar underneath it. And then there was another brand when they split, and I think that was a J Lazy Y, but I'm not sure.
And then the other photos that you have, those are taken at Eaton's?
All of these are of Domo taken at Eaton's.
At Eaton's.
There are other pictures of Domo in books that are not at Eaton's. These are her cabin down on Wolf Creek. A lot of dudes rode down there 3 miles and she'd have cookies or homemade jam and biscuits. They seldom came inside. There was usually a table outside. And then when I stayed with Annie Faye, the dudes would come and we would take out cookies and milk or cookies and coffee for the dudes.
Is her cabin still there?
Yes, it is still there. It is now called Domo's Cabin, and they have, Eaton's has have breakfast rides down there at least once a week. So the cowboys go down early and slap, pancakes and eggs, and then the dudes ride down and have breakfast. Yes, it is still there.
How did the book come about?
Oh, thank you. The book came about through correspondence, letters to Helen Huntington Smith. Domo and Helen Huntington Smith never met. They may have much later, but when the book was written, and Helen Huntington wrote it based on the letters that Nannie wrote her. My father did not like the book. He said Nannie sounds like a worrywart and kind of whiny, and he said she was never that way. She was a very tough, wonderful woman. So I thought that was kind of interesting. I love the book, but I didn't know Domo, so I don't know.
Have you been to the place on Young's Creek?
I have not.
Okay, I was wondering, there's nothing there now, but for a long time there was a post office on Young's Creek called Pearl.
Oh,
It was actually, I think they have a little grocery store and everything else in there, but there was a post office. And I was wondering if, since your predecessor was also a postmistress, it may have been how that occurred in that area.
not to my knowledge. As far as I know, she moved there because her oldest daughter had married and had a ranch there.
Okay.
So she moved to a neighboring ranch. Sorry, I guess I shouldn't move. I have not. The only building that I know of that I've been in was Domo's Cabin. It used to be a 3-room and is now a 1-room with a big roof over a picnic area.
And of course, Buffalo Bill's hunting cabin had been upstream from the ranch, and they moved it to Ellen Cotton's ranch.
Oh, okay. Yeah, and when I was a child, we just lived over the hill we lived at 4 Mile, just lived over the hill from Ellen Cotton. Any other questions?
Wow.
Just a comment. Zachary Taylor Cox was the chief clerk on the Cheyenne Reservation.
Oh, really?
Yes.
Yeah. And so the Coxes, I'm not related to the Coxes, but they had 4 boys, and of course Lou Alderson's ancestor, like the Bones brothers, they're all related to the Coxes. So I know a lot of the Coxes, but I'm not actually blood related to them. Yes.
How did Lou Alderson happen to get out here?
He came because Walt was here. So he came after Walt was here, and the first job he managed, it said the OD in the book, but is the OD part of the 40? Where's the OD? I couldn't find any information on the OD, so I don't know if it's a misprint or, because I know that he did work for Brown's, which is the 40, so I'm guessing that's what it managed.
Is the Circle 3 where the ranch was? The Circle 3 is there today.
3 Circle.
3 Circle, it's close to that, but I think the 3 Circle existed when they were there. They were on Zook Creek, which is a tributary to the Tongue River. And it's close to that, but if you look on a map, you can see the Zook Creek, and they lived up Zook Creek, away from Tongue River a little bit.
Actually, I think, I'm not 100% sure of this, but I think I'm right, is that when Captain Brown bought out the Zook Alderson partnership, bought it from Zook.
Okay,
I think that the Browns were down Tongue River about a mile, and on the other side of the river, bought, when they bought the Zook Alderson out, then they moved to where they were, and they built what's now the 3 Circle, which is all the stone buildings.
oh, okay. Yes, Lee?
So Peachy Cox, she's Bones's aunt?
Aunt, and but she raised Boneses. And some people call her Aunt Mamie, and some people call her Cousin Peachy, but she's the same person, because her name was Mary.
But,
That's clear.
they're no relation to the, or Libby and the Coxes that lived in Bernie.
Yes, they were, because there were 4 Cox boys. One of the Cox boys is Taylor Cox's.
It was Ned Cox, and Taylor Cox was his son.
There you go. I'm glad Forrest is here. He said Ned Cox was Zachary's son and Taylor's dad.
Okay.
Yes,
Brown Cattle Company, there's a couple of books to reference if you wanna read a little about it. It's Beef, Leather, and Grass, and Hell Among the Yearlings. And they were written by a guy named Edmund Randolph, who he got kicked out of Harvard, and he came to Eaton's, and he run into the chore boy, who was Brown's chore boy, and he took him to the Brown Ranch. In the books, they call it the White Ranch. I don't know why. There was 2 brothers came out of the Civil War up here. And they formed the Brown Cattle Company. They had all kinds of ranches in those books. But they're really interesting books to read.
I know that my grandfather, Walt, that was the first roundup he went on was with the Browns. You had a question.
I just had a statement. In the winter that you told us about in 1885 and 86, that was so terrible. Well, Charlie Russell painted a picture, the last of the 10,000, and that depicts what happened that winter. And I just think that's an interesting connection.
Yeah, I remember that picture. Yeah.
Maybe it was 86, 87.
And the Russells were, Charlie Russell was a very good friend of the Eatons, and there are some notes in Eatons from that. And then Bill Gollings was a very good friend of the Aldersons also. And we actually had some originals of his. One was a really cool cowboy, which my grandmother sold when she was in Tucson. And then we had 3 others that were seeds, and they ended up in Bill King's gallery after Mother died. And when he cleaned them, they were amazing. They were but they were really cool pictures. Anything else? Yes?
Something that we read in the book I thought was kind of interesting and ironic. When he bought the horses, I believe it was, he had a loan at 18% interest.
Yeah, it was very high.
And when he passed away, she had a $3,000 life insurance. And you don't think of interest rates as being that high, or that life insurance existed at that time in the 1890s.
Yeah, and he had a $6,000 one, but he sold it to buy something. I don't remember. Probably a horse, you're right. Well, thank you, I appreciate you.